Hi, everybody. I just wanted to jump in before the podcast and let you know we had some technical difficulties. I've done my best to clean it up in editing, but we were still kind of both trying to give the other space to talk and not talk over each other. Made it a bit difficult. I think it's a nice conversation anyways, and I hope you enjoy it despite the technical difficulties. Here we go. Hello and welcome to, I guess we're calling this episode 3 now of the Lighting Lounge. We're not trying to be Quentin Tarantino and rearrange all of the numbers, but Aid pointed out that 0 and 1 happened already, so we did 2 last time, and we are on to 3. So here we are. How are you doing tonight, Aid?
Excellent. Oh, it's good to be back. Surprised that we're already at show number 3.
Yeah.
No, I think it's the right way to number it, though, seeing as those other ones are out there, and they are still on the Sunny 16 Presents feed. So, we don't delete stuff off the feed, so they'll be there out there. But, of course, it'll be a different show entirely.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're just kind of plugging along, starting with some of the kind of basic things about light. We talked last time. What did we talk about last time? We talked about why are we bothering with lighting, I think.
It definitely, yes, philosophical, a bit about the why and what we hope to gain from it and stuff like that. So this one's going to be a nice contrast, isn't it? You're going to talk about some technical stuff now, some characteristics and types of light.
Yeah, so the idea, I saw a video on the internet at some point, and the internet being what it is, I couldn't find it again, so sorry, internet. But one of these videos, it was one of these, the 5 things about light, or the 5 properties of light, and, of course, if you Google that, you get about 45 million hits. But the idea was, when you're talking about light or lighting something, there are certain characteristics or properties of the light that one can control or modify or adapt or adjust to suit your needs. And so that's kind of what we wanted to talk about tonight, is those particular qualities, what they are, and how you can adjust them, either with artificial light or maybe even with natural light. So that's kind of the idea.
Yeah, and in recognition of the fact that we're talking about types of light, I've actually gone and dug out a light, and so anybody that's watching this on YouTube, hopefully we will have sorted this out, and you will be able to watch this on the brand new Sunny 16 Presents YouTube channel, which is where these podcasts, at the time of recording, future tense, will end up. But that is on me, I'm afraid. So yes, if you happen to be watching this, you will notice that I am lit by a type of light that causes some shadows, whereas John Michael is lit by a much softer light. So more on that in a moment, because that's not the first characteristic of light that we're going to talk about today.
Yep. So these in no particular order. The first one on our list anyways is brightness. And people often compare lighting to water. So it's just kind of the amount of light you've got to work with. We can also talk about things like camera settings, because you can make a really bright image with not a lot of light, or you can make a really dark image with a whole lot of light going on. So the amount of light, I guess the first control of that would be kind of your camera settings and what you're doing with a given amount of light.
Well, I like a big hole in the front of my lens. I don't know about you.
That's usually good, yeah. So just briefly, you've got your shutter speed, your aperture, and your film sensitivity or your sensor sensitivity. So those are your classic exposure triangle, and we don't need to go into that too much, I don't think. Yeah, if you're wondering about that, then.
And then, well, no. I think, but just to reflect on, I do find sometimes that when you're talking about light, that actually sometimes the way that filmmakers and video makers talk is perhaps a little bit more intuitive. So often they won't talk about ISO, for example, in terms of sensitivity, whether it's film or digital. They'll talk about gain. And they turn the gain up, and that I find to be slightly more intuitive than the way that we photographers talk. They often will refer to aperture as iris, after the way that the aperture actually works in a lens. reasonably comfortable with both of those because, of course, as a photographer, I've grown up with aperture. But yeah, iris is quite logical. The one that I find slightly less counterintuitive is the way they talk about shutter angles rather than shutter speeds, because you kind of have to know how film cameras used to work nearly 100 years ago to understand how shutter angles work. So I suppose film cameras still work in that way today, but the systems were invented a long time ago. But yeah, it's yes. But as you say, less today about the exposure triangle, I think.
Yeah. All right. So the idea of brightness in an image comes kind of down to what the person decided at the end they wanted that brightness to be. And of course, if you've got a lot of light to work with, then you can decide to make it bright or to make it dark. And some things are easier than others in lighting. If you have a dark space and you want to add light to it, that's pretty easy. If you've got a big bright room and you want to take light away from it, or you're outside on a bright day, reducing light takes a bit more effort often. I know Peter Lindbergh used to really like to go out on the beach, and he would put kind of a big black marquee on the beach as a shade. So he would create his own open shade by kind of tenting off, making a dark tunnel, and the models would stand inside that tunnel and get kind of lit by the reflected light from the sand and the sky to give it a nice kind of soft and beautiful sky.
That's very interesting.
Yeah. So that was one of his preferred techniques.
Interesting, because the black, I mean, sometimes referred to as negative fill, I suppose. It would soak up some of that light and not reflect it all around, much like the inside of a camera itself.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, let's talk about the type. Yeah, so two types of or two terms, that people will often have heard relating to lighting are low key and high key. And for me, I'm sure there are technical things, but I basically tend to think of this one as a high key one is quite a bright image, and a low key one is simply a less bright image. Now, it doesn't mean that, especially with the low key one, it doesn't mean that the image is dark or that the subject is dark. Often, as with this image that you're showing right now, the subject is very nicely lit and very easy to see, but overall the effect of the image is of a dark image. So this particular one, your model is very nicely lit, her face and her arm and the thing around her neck, but her dress is dark and the background is black, and so it all fades to black. So this is a great example for me of a low-key image.
Yeah. I think a lot of times when you look at a histogram, you can kind of get an idea if it's a low key or a high key image. And the histogram is just kind of a line chart of how much white pixels and how many black pixels you've got in your image, and that kind of will give you a spread of if you've got if it's all gray, it'll all be bunched up in the middle. If it's all white, it'll all be bunched up on one side, and if it's all black, it'll all be bunched up on the other side. So that's kind of the...
I don't pay a lot of attention to histograms, actually, I have to say, so you'll have to help me out here. So if I was looking at this image that you're showing, which is, as I just described, that the is mostly black, by area of the image, it's mostly black, but the subject, she is very nicely lit.
Yeah.
So would this mean that there would be most of the action in the histogram would be to the far left at where all the black is, and then there'd just be a thin sliver where the white is?
Yeah, exactly. So there would be, it would be mostly black, which is, all the way to the left, if I'm remembering that correctly. I think it's on the left-hand side is black.
Yeah.
And so you kind of scan along the image, and then you get to the amount of very dark gray, which is kind of, in the transitions from her shadows to the lights. And there's not much because it's hard light, which we'll talk about in a minute. So those kind of dark gray areas there's not very many of them. So there would be a little spike, kind of in the middle gray area.
Proportionally, the percentage of the image that is that tone is very small.
All
Yeah.
right.
Okay. Cool. So how and we go about creating these low key images by being very controlling with how the light spreads. So
Yeah.
yeah, you would have. It's not necessarily necessary to shoot in a dark room, because if your light is sufficiently bright, then it will overpower any ambient light anyway. So it doesn't need to be fully dark in the room or anything like that. But you probably wouldn't want too much ambient light, and then you'd be paying a lot of attention to where your light is going. So, and a great way to think about this in terms of lighting modifiers is if you have a shoot through umbrella, those are designed to spread light as far and wide as they possibly can. So you probably wouldn't be wanting to use a shoot through umbrella for a low key image, but you might choose to use a softbox with a grid on it, as the grid stops the light spreading too much. Or if you had a strobe light, you might use, you could, if you wanted it really tight, you might use barn doors, or you could use a snoot, which is a tapered cylinder, basically, so that where the fat end goes on the light and it tapers to a thin end, so only a small hole is available for the light to travel outwards, and therefore you can control the direction of the light quite nicely.
It's kind of like a
So
nozzle on a garden hose, funneling
kind
all
of,
that
yeah,
light,
good point. Yes, we should. Yes, thinking of light flowing like water is. I know that's one thing that you do, and it's an interesting concept you've shared with me, because it's not something I've ever really thought about, light flowing like water. I don't know. Maybe it's because I studied physics. I don't know. I tend to think of it in quantum terms. Not that I ever got as good as quantum physics at school, but yeah, it's just like, if you don't pay attention to, if you don't look at the photons, they'll take every possible path from point A to point B.
Yeah.
And so you have to look at the photons. You have to pay attention. You have to make sure they go in the right direction.
You have to be herding all the photons, kind of like cats, all the land where you want them to be.
Absolutely. The good thing is with photons is that as long as you look at them, they're fine.
Yeah, just got to pay attention. So this one I think was a bare bulb flash, and I used a little flash bender, which is a lighting modifier. It's kind of
okay.
It's a little square of it's black on one side and white on the other, and it's got some kind of bendy metal arms in it, so you can adjust the shape of it. And I used that just to keep the light from spilling onto the background. It would be really hard to do an image like this on a bright sunny day outside. That would be very challenging. You would need a really powerful, strong light to overpower the sun to make the background go black.
I was looking through photos for today's show, and I came across some that I'd actually shot outside with speed lights on hot sunny day. So I know we've got that in a later show. We've got overpowering the sun as a topic. So they're not for sharing today, but stay tuned, listeners, because there will be a topic about how to shoot outside with lights.
All right, so that's kind of our low key image. So this is not a whole lot of light. This would be what I would consider almost a high key image. I think some people would argue that point because there's a lot of black in it. And the idea of a high key image is that it's mostly white with some grays and some blacks. So this might be considered more of a high contrast image rather than a high key image. Mm-hmm. But it's the highest key image that I could find on short notice. So that's the one that I pulled up. And the idea with a high key image is that you've got a whole lot of light. So this is a model. She's got her hands on her hips, and she's standing in front of a wall of light, basically. All the light in this image is coming from behind her, and it's kind of wrapping around. So you can see that on the side of her face, she's looking a bit to the side. You can see that side of her face has got a bit of an edge light to it. Around her arms and legs and that sort of thing. You can see a bit of light kind of sneaking around the model and lighting up the sides of her as well. So it's not a silhouette. You can still see her from the front, but it's a very light image.
Yeah, it is. It's yes, I suspect high contrast, verging on high key, as you say. It is interesting. People perhaps may not have so much experience if they're not into lighting indoors with light that bends, because of course light isn't supposed to bend, is it? But what we mean by that is that if something is backlit with a very strong backlight, there will always be some reflection of other stuff, and so and there can be so much light that it also has an impact on whatever it is that on your lens. And the way that the lens renders the light then as well. So there are a few sort of physics type effects that will happen, bouncing of light from when you didn't intend it, and other things that happen, and it always does look like the light bends, and you think to yourself, well, how come? And if I look at this image, the model's shoulder blades look like they've got a light directly on them, but the only light is coming from behind her. And I think, well, how can that be? And it is just one of those marvelous effects of when you have a great big bright light behind you, it does appear to bend, and you do get effectively a fill light that comes from behind, which is an intriguing concept, but one you can play with, as you have done clearly here, John Michael, and it can be very effective.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because when you have a big soft light, then the light from one edge of the source will actually fill in the shadows coming from the that are being cast by the other side of the light source. So the bigger your light source is, then you kind of fill in the shadows automatically with the other side of the same light, rather than having two lights, one that creates a shadow and the other that fills it in. You kind of getting a fill and a key light from one big soft source, which maybe brings us to our next topic, which kind of the size and the distance of light. So we were talking about the hardness or the softness of light, which I know when I started was kind of a weird thing for me to think about. It's like, well, light is light. Is it hard? Is it soft? I don't know.
I find that confusing at times, because actually it's the shadows, really, isn't it? It's either the shadows are hard or the shadows are soft, but rather than the light. The light is just the light, but but yeah, this image you've got here is lovely. I'm guessing a bridesmaid, and she's lit in a very with a very soft light. So all the shadows around her are very soft. The spread of light across her, there's definitely coming from a particular direction, from camera left, but it's soft. There's not so much fall off that the other side, her other side is in shadow. Particularly, it's just a slightly less light falling there. So it's very, very softly lit, and the shadows are very soft, and that can be very flattering for a person, especially for people like me who tend to have quite a few wrinkles, because if you can soften the light and make the shadows less harsh, then it can make you look how you prefer to look, quite frankly.
Well, the hard light is mean to everybody. It's the harder the light, the each pore gets. You see every little imperfection or pore or anything, because a point light will cast shadows from anything that's not perfectly smooth. So I see that with my jewelry quite a bit. When I'm taking pictures of a ring that's got a mirror polish on it, and then I go take pictures of it, I can see little divots and imperfections in that polish that are completely invisible to the naked eye. But even with a big soft light source, they scream at me and go, "Here, you missed a spot."
Well, a big soft light source is the thing. So we should probably talk about what we mean by that, isn't it? Because some people will say, "Oh, the sun is quite a big light, isn't it?" And yet the sun will cast quite strong, hard-edged shadows. And the simple fact of that is that actually it's not the size of the light in absolute terms, it's the size of the light relative to your subject. So a small light can be relatively quite big to the subject if you have it very close.
Hmm.
So you could have if you have a small light very close to, you can have a very, very small light very close to a piece of jewelry that you've made. And actually that would create a very soft light across it. Whereas you can have an enormous light. You could have, let's say you've got one of those fancy 8 foot across octoboxes that fashion studios use and things like that. It may be 8 feet across, but if it's 30 feet away, then it's going to look like a hard light, because relatively compared to your subject, it's going to be fairly small. So it is very much a feature of a combination of the distance from the subject and the size of the light that will give you your softness or your hardness.
I couldn't put it any better myself.
Can you perhaps remember from this photo, how close the light might have been, or how big it would have been?
Yep. So for this image, I pulled it up because I know exactly what I did. The light is maybe 3 centimeters outside of frame. So it is right there. And I recently heard it called a waterfall, which I hadn't heard before, but I kind of like that. I'm getting back to water again. It is a sheet of diffusion fabric, which is basically the white fabric that you see in the front of a softbox or a diffuser or something like that. And I just bought
or if you're not a photographer, like fabric. A shower curtain.
Yeah, shower curtain or a thin curtain. So that is hanging just from a stand right off to her side. And then I think I even went a step further and put an umbrella behind that. So the light is coming from a flash, hitting an umbrella, and then hitting this huge sheet of fabric, which was, I think 1.5 by 3 meters or something like that. So it was a very large light source off to her side, which gives you this nice kind of soft light.
Okay, nice. Now this is the next one. So this is one of mine. This is actually a picture of my daughter, which she won't mind me showing because she's a lot older than this now. This is when she was a lot younger. And this is an example of a hard light. And again, like you, John Michael, chosen in this case, because I remember exactly how it was shot, even though it was, I think, about 8 years ago. So the picture here is of my daughter. She's just against a wall, and you can tell she's quite close to the wall because there's a big dark shadow behind her. She's looking upwards and away from both the camera and the light is falling on her face. I think she'd been playing with Granny's beads, so she's got lots of beads around her neck, and she's got some in her hair and stuff like that. So I think she'd been in Granny's dress up, jewelry drawer. And I happen to have with me this day, I'm pretty sure this was shot on film, and I happen to have with me just a little pocket light panel, which I've talked about before, I think, which is a little LED panel. It's about the form factor of a mobile phone, so a large mobile phone, but nonetheless it's no bigger than that, and it's probably about 2 feet or 60 centimeters away from her, so it's not far out of shot from how this shot was taken. But because it's quite close, but because it's quite a small source of light, it's throwing a harder shadow, and we're not getting any of that nice wraparound effect that we saw in the earlier shot, because the light is quite small, so you're not getting lots of sideways light coming in and appearing to wrap round and stuff like that. So it's not got the thing that I was talking about, which I probably described quite poorly earlier on, but the thing I was trying to say about the lens and the way the lens renders the light is that you can get from a big sort of light source some soft glare, which adds to the effect of wrapping the light around. And of course, in this case, the light is not behind the subject. It's actually off camera left, and it's pointing at her rather than at the camera. So you don't get that either. So the net effect of this is actually some harder shadows. And it has its place. Luckily my daughter's probably only about 3 years old in this photo, so she doesn't have any wrinkles to show up.
Yeah. The the characteristic from the lens that you were talking about, I think it's considered flare when you get that kind of light hazy look, and older lenses are well known for that. And a lot of cinematographers and filmmakers tend to look for lenses that will kind of give you that hazy look or that flared look when you've got a strong light in frame pointing into the lens. And you can also use things like a black pro mist filter or a diffusion filter on the front of your lens. If your lens happens to be too good, then you can smear it up a bit by adding these kind of diffusion filters. And I use those as well when I was doing that backlit shot. I don't remember if I had it on for that one or not, but even on old film cameras, I still sometimes use the diffusion filter just to kind of give it that extra level of fuzziness in the soft light image. But as you were saying, this one is then the contrary to that, and you've got a nice hard light.
Yes. I was just a nice hard light and no issues of the flare kind. Just I suppose just a quick note on the flare is if you are deliberately shooting with a backlight or a very bright background and you get that and you don't want it, it is perhaps a sign that your exposure is just a little on the high side. And if you close down the aperture just a little bit, you often can make that go away. So that's another tip there, or another diagnostic tool for having. But yeah, the hard light, I like hard light occasionally. Right, as I said earlier on today, I am lit by quite a hard light. So anybody who can see this video on YouTube, my light is about 30 centimeters across. It's sort of a square. It's an LED panel, but it's probably 2 meters away from me. So by comparison, relative size to me, it's quite small, and that is why I look like I have a fairly hard shadow down one side of my face, and the shadow of my nose on my face as well from that. So just playing with light today, which is always good fun. What's up next?
All right, so coming up next, we've got another one from you, and I have to click the right buttons here. And that is a nice low-key image. Yep. And
okay, so this is my daughter again.
Yep. So this one I found really interesting because it's a soft light, but it's a low-key image. So you've got a almost completely dark image. You can see a little bit of sofa in it. You can see kind of a hint of a wall in the background, and the young girl has got her head kind of leaning on the arm of the sofa, and there's a kind of little pool of light just falling right on her. But you can see from the shadows that it's a fairly soft light. So how did you manage that one?
That's a really good question. The approach for this is, I guess, is twofold. First of all, you've got to dial out the ambient, right? So you have to have an ambient exposure setting that is going to make it essentially dark. I mean, she has got her head on the arm of the sofa. She was tired one afternoon, I think, possibly watching television, and just resting. So the trick, so first step is to set an ambient setting that is going to render all of that dark apart from where you put the light. Second step is the light itself. Now that was a single speed light in a small softbox. I'm talking about something that's like maybe 30 centimeters by 20 centimeters, or 25 by 20 or something like that. It's actually quite a small softbox. It's the sort that actually velcros onto the head of your speed light. So if anybody's got those, and to make it soft, of course, it is practically in her ear, right? It is very, very marginally out of shot. So that was so that was how I achieved that one. So it's soft light by being close rather than by being big, and the way it's a pool of light is that it's actually a small box, and so there's not a big light surface to light up the surrounding. I think the only other thing to mention is that I shot this on a camera with a leaf shutter. So I think it was shot on a Fuji X20, which is a compact camera with a fixed lens, a non-interchangeable zoom lens, and which has a leaf shutter. It's possibly the only camera I ever regret selling. And it was an amazing camera. You could shoot in bright daylight with it. Giving away secrets from another show that we haven't yet made, but you could literally kill off the sunlight with a single speed light with this camera because it had a leaf shutter.
When you say dialing in the ambient, just to explain that a little bit, you're setting basically your shutter speed and your aperture to give a dark room. Is that what you've gone through?
Yes.
So you use probably mostly your shutter speed for this one.
It will have been a combination of shutter speed. It'll be a combination of all three, actually. It'll be playing with the exposure triangle. So I imagine I had the ISO dialed right down at base ISO. The shutter speed would have been quite high, maybe a 500th or more. And then the aperture would have been, I don't know. It would have been to balance, right? So let's say the aperture is the balance, and just to make sure that there was no extra ambient light. So what you're trying to do is to set your exposure manually so that you get basically a black photo if you don't add light to it, but you don't want it to be like 5 stops into the black so that you have to add the force of the sun to light your you want it to be just into the black. You want to be dialing the ambient all the way out, but only just all the way out, so that you don't have to fill with too much light that would possibly be more light than you've actually got.
Yeah, and we'll go into much more detail on that when we get into flashes and combining light and that sort of thing. But all right, so let's move on to the next image here. And so this is another hard light image, and this one I wanted to pull in because it also starts talking about the next kind of attribute of light, which is the direction of the light. So far, all of these images have had a direction or another. But this one is set up so that, again, it's a model. She's standing square on to the camera, and the light is coming from almost 90 degrees to the camera. So it's coming from her camera left side, kind of at her shoulder, and it's hitting her in such a way that you've almost got a clean line of shadow down her nose, and her far side of her face is falling completely off into shadow.
Yeah, and this one sometimes known as split lighting, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a split lighting. It's when you've got kind of a half and half. Broad lighting is when the face, the part of the face that's closer to you is more illuminated, and short lighting is when the side of the face that's further away from you is more illuminated. You have to have at least kind of a slight head turn for that to make any sense, though. And anyways. So one of the things that's interesting about the direction of light is the texture that you get with the light. The texture gets more dramatic the more off to the side your light becomes.
I think this particular image is very effective, actually. It's not the split lighting is not a technique I've personally experimented with much, but this one is, you've got a great outcome here because you've got the split lighting. So the one side of her face is in shadow, but you've got just a little bit of light on her eye to give it just that definition, and some of her hair is coming just a little bit forward so it catches as well. So you've got just enough detail to work out the shapes, and your brain can fill in the gaps. Very, very well crafted shot, sir.
I think this one is with one of my favorite little modifiers. It's a collapsible beauty dish. It's like a little pop-up tent, and so you kind of pop it out, and it's I guess 30 or 35 centimeters round kind of modifier for a speed. And so it gives you a little bit more size to work with. And again, it's just right out of frame on her right, camera left.
I'm guessing that beauty dish isn't diffused in any way, because sometimes you can put a diffusion cover on them, occasionally called a sock. But I'm guessing that in this case, because you've gone for a hard light, you haven't got anything there, so it's just the dish acting as a reflector and channeling the light.
Well, it's not a real beauty dish. It's more like a softbox. So it's got a diffusion panel on the front, and it's reflective on the inside. Your classic beauty dish is actually metal and has a little kind of reflector in front of the flash head itself, which bounces the light back into the dish, which then loops around and comes out the front. And you can also put modifiers on those, like you can put a grid on it, you can put a sock on it. And these little collapsible ones aren't that sophisticated. The fabric, so it's kind of like a softbox, but with a beauty dish flavor. It's a round softbox. I don't know. So this, by contrast, is a soft light image, and is a young lady. She's actually laying on a runway at an airport. Cloudy day, nice big softbox. The whole world was diffused, and
yeah, it's a beautiful one. This one, I like it a lot. It's yes, as you can see, it's a great example of how such a soft light can be very flattering as well, because all across the model's face and her arms as well is it's all very smooth lighting, and therefore quite flattering, and and it's easy on the eye as well, isn't it? A soft light, I find, and this is a great picture, and I don't mean that in a negative way that it's not interesting. It is an interesting image, but equally, it's the way it's lit is easy to work with, easy to appreciate and to see.
Yeah, and I think the kind of the contrast between the hard light and the soft light, if you want to have a flattering image, then go for something soft. Everybody looks better in soft light. The hard light kind of tends to go in more, at least for portraits, kind of the direction of fashion, or a bit edgier, a bit harder, grungier. You can kind of influence the feeling of the shot by whether it's hard or soft light. Next up, we have color. Color was one of the other things that you can affect with a light. So this is an image with two different colored gels on the flashes, and there's actually a third light in here trying to bring back some semblance of skin tone to her face.
You got a yellow gel on one side, then lighting from camera right, so it's lighting the model's body, the left of her body from camera right, but also the wall in the background on the left hand side of the image, and then a purpley blue light coming from camera left, so it's lighting that side of her body, and then the opposite side of the wall. It's an interesting effect. But yes, I can understand why, if you're lighting a model with both purple and orange light, then you need something for her face, because otherwise her face is just going to look purple and orange. So I can understand why you would have chosen to bring a third light in, which it looks to me like is slightly off to camera right somewhere, because it looks like it's lighting up that side of her face more.
Yeah, I think it was just a little bare bulb, or maybe in a small grid. But the idea with color is a bit tricky to, especially in film. Outdoors, you kind of get the color of light that you get, and it's not very easy to change that. You can maybe use something like a tungsten film outside, so you would get a different color cast doing it that way. With digital, you can adjust your color temperature to kind of have an effect on what the daylight is giving you. I suppose you could put a big gel in front of a window or something like that, and change the color of the light coming through that way. But when you're dealing with studio lights or strobes or that sort of thing, Joe McNally really likes that a lot. He's always putting little CTO gels, which is color temperature orange or color temperature blue, just to kind of match or place certain color tints on little background elements, that sort of thing.
Yeah, yes, it is. I mean, so I have a number of lights that you can do that, and constant lights are quite good for that because you can really tune in what it is that you're getting. So many lights these days, LED based lights, will have some level of color adjustment. Some will just be the color, the temperature of the white light. So I'm being lit at the moment by something I think is around about 3200 Kelvin, so quite a warm light, but the light itself will go up to 5600. So something more approaching daylight. The little light panel you mentioned, yes, that goes from cool to warm as well. And then of course you have these days a lot of very affordable these days actually, RGB lights, where you can literally choose the mixture of red, green and blue, and your light will, depending on how much you pay for it, reasonably faithfully recreate what you dial in. And on a practical note, and even more so if you're buying cheaper lights, it really is a good idea to buy lights of the same kind and from the same brand. So for example, they're a few years old now, and one of them at least has failed, or is part failing. I have some Yongnuo LED light wands, think mini lightsabers, and you can tune the colors of those to anything you like. They're RGB lights, they're warm and cool white lights. But if I put them with another brand of light, especially another cheap brand of light, the colors are different. So just a little bit of a pragmatic tip there. If you're thinking of getting some new lights or some extra lights, always good to stick with the same brand if you can.
All right, so we've got one more quality on our list, and this was one that both Ada and I are a little bit confused about, or had a lot of experience with. And I don't have a good image. This was a picture I took. Actually, I think I took this one for the Lighting Lounge episode 1. I think you guys called out for some images. I made this one for that many moons ago. So here it is. And this is a picture of a camera, and it's a very diffuse light source. This was done with one flashlight and a whole bunch of white sheets of paper. I basically built a little cylinder out of white printer paper with a roof and did a long exposure, moving the flashlight all the way around the camera and over the top and everything. So you can really imagine, if we go back to our water analysis, kind of pouring water through this flashlight on the camera until the whole thing is wet. Just do that with light, especially with your cameras. Don't try it with a hose. But the idea is that everything is covered with light more or less equally. If I had done the same thing without the diffuse paper, then there would be a lot more shiny corners on the camera. Along where the glass is, everything that's a highlight now would be much brighter. And that would be what I understand to be more specular. So when the light is a undiffused light, then it's a tinier reflection. So the reflection on my forehead right now is soft reflection because I've got a big diffuser here. If I took the diffuser away, then the shape of this reflection would be much brighter, and the edge would be harder. So that's the kind of my understanding of specular light versus diffuse light. And you'll hear about that a lot when you're talking about umbrellas with diffusion or without diffusion, and then a white beauty dish versus a silver beauty dish, or a white reflector versus a silver reflector. So all of those sorts of things will give you a very slightly different kind of quality of the highlight. Almost like the opposite of soft versus hard light, where you're looking at the transition of the shadows.
Well, thank you, first of all, because it's a one that I've always struggled with as well. I knew it was something to do with highlights, and I knew it was something to do with reflections, but it's one that has always eluded me. I guess this is the point where we have to fess up, or at least certainly I have to fess up and say, I will try and talk, knowledgeably about the stuff that I actually know about and have practiced and tried myself on this podcast. I will try not to talk about stuff that I don't know about, or at least to flag up where I don't know stuff. I'm going to try and be as honest as possible about that, because I still very much feel that as much as I love light, there's still a huge amount that I have to learn about it. So, I consider this a learning moment on this podcast. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Oh, for me too. And the properties that we gone through were the amount of light, so the brightness, the direction of the light, the size or the softness of the color of the light, and now we've got this specularity thing. So those are 5 parameters that you can pick from and mix and match. You can have a bright hard light, you can have a bright diffuse light, a soft hard or soft and diffuse, colorful. And then when you start mixing and matching multiple light sources, and each one of those has a couple of different those qualities, and you can see how it's very, very complicated very quickly, but gives you a whole lot of options.
Yeah, yes, it does, and can be really creative choices as well. So if there's I find it's quite useful to think in terms of the characteristics of the light when I'm imagining and trying to set up a shot. It's like, okay, what do I want to do here? What do I want to do to there? I mean, today, again, I've been doing some product photography today for my wife's online store, her craft store. And that's very much about big, soft lights so that you can show the products that she makes in a I was going to say a well-lit way, but well-lit could mean anything in this conversation, couldn't it? What I should probably say is in a way that shows what the product looks like. So it still needs to be nice, and still some little sets that we design for the composition. But really what you're trying to do is show the features of the product. So a bit like this camera, it's about an even lighting across the whole of the product and making that. So for that, we just get out the big lights. Actually, I say big lights, I don't mean big lights, because really it's the big softbox. It's my big octabox, which I just work off 2 speed lights inside it, and trigger those from a trigger that's just sits on the top of the camera in the hot shoe. So it's nothing particularly expensive or flashy. It looks impressive though. You walk into the house and go, oh wow, there's lots of big lighting equipment around. It's like most of the lighting equipment is the empty space inside the soft boxes. Cool. That's been a really interesting conversation, and it's interesting I do enjoy a bit of a technical discussion about these things as well. Don't know about you.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think for me, when I'm working with a light, as you say, and I think, okay, it's not doing what I want it to do, then it helps to go back to these kind of basic properties and say, okay, well, which of these properties is not doing what I want it to do? Is it too bright? Is it too dark? That's an easy one. Is it too hard? Is it too soft? Maybe it's the direction. That's the one that I adjust a lot. Is I'm constantly moving the light stand back and forth a little bit just to kind of try and get the angle right. So kind of I like to keep these properties in the back of my head, just toolbox. Know which factor do I want to play with? Which knob do I want to tweak to get the image to look how I want it to look? Well, that was a whole lot about the different properties of light and hopefully how to adjust them. Hopefully interesting and maybe helpful for some people. If you have anything in particular you would like us to talk about, feel free to drop us a line and we'll try and fit that in. We've got a few more shows kind of in the works, planning on doing a few different things. If you're just listening to the podcast version, go ahead and check out the Discord, and Aid will be posting the pictures that we're discussing, so you've got an idea of what we're talking about.
Yeah, I've enjoyed the conversation certainly today, and yeah, I'm looking forward to more discussion in the Discord as well. So yeah, we're running this at least in contemporaneously with a mini series on the main Sunny 16 channel. So yeah, there should be, hopefully there's lots of, well, it's already started, lots of discussion about lighting in the Sunny 16 Discord, for which there will be a link in the show notes, and we'll share the images that we've been talking about, as John Michael said. Sadly, I think we said in the last show that we'd be trying to include images as chapter markers in podcasts so people could see them on their phone. Sadly, our podcast hosting platform doesn't support that feature of podcasts, so I overreached a little bit when I promised that, so I apologize. And it'll be the Discord will be the place that we'll be able to share those alongside, of course, the YouTube channel.
Well, it was lovely chatting, and I look forward to the next conversation about whatever that's going to be about. And we will talk to you all in a little while. So have a great time playing with light. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.